This video is loosely a companion to the two videos on screen right now. You don't need to watch these. I'm going to give the previously on Dragon Ball Z rundown, but if you want the sources, stats, and all that other stuff that support my conclusions, go check those out. The SparkNotes version of those videos, or I guess ChatGPT summary in this day and age, is that training for self-defense and or fighting is over-evaluated in martial arts discourse, and that the Japanese martial arts have always been about fitness, sport, philosophy, and art just as much as about personal combat or self-defense. In this video, I'm not going to rely on sources very much, but speak a bit more anecdotally and personally about some of this stuff and what it means for my training and practice. I usually don't like leaning into anecdotes too much because I think we martial artists overly rely on this kind of janky, weak evidence to justify our views. Anecdotes and personal experiences, I think, are fine when they are used to define your individual journey in martial arts. As an art form, what we do is inherently subjective, after all. What I take issue with is when anecdotes, rumor, small sample sizes, and personal experiences are used to build a position that encompasses all of a given art or martial arts themselves. To give an example of each, saying jujitsu helped you in a self-defense situation before and therefore it's an art you want to invest time in is totally legitimate. On the other hand, saying jujitsu helped you in a self-defense situation before and is therefore the best grappling system for self-defense period is the kind of argument I think a few of my college professors would have verbally executed me for in front of my peers. Unfortunately, due to marketing, social media, and general hyperbole, discussion gravitates towards these overreaching, polarized, and poorly researched takes. But that isn't here nor there. My point in this video isn't to hit you with a bunch of research. It's to demonstrate that I've done all this research, talk a little bit about my personal experiences, and then reflect on where all of that is taking me personally. If I were to criticize those old professors of mine or the academic world of humanities as a whole, it's that there is little effort put forward to connect all the abstract knowledge with something in practice, something tangible. And yes, this is a weakness of my channel as well in many ways. So this video is talking about how all that stuff in my previous content is translating into my own training. That said, I want to start off by saying that despite my rejection of focusing too much on self-defense, I've been into self-defense situations. I'm not going to really get too heavily into the details though, not because it's necessarily secret or anything like that, but because I think the results are more important here. I learned basically two major lessons from these encounters. First, self-defense situations, as long as you're living your life reasonably, are pretty rare. I've been doing martial arts for 25 years, who knows how many thousands of hours, and all of about maybe 3 minutes of my time actually resulted in a self-defense across two encounters. You don't need to be a gifted mathematician to calculate that this is a poor return on investment. I've seen commentary saying that they need martial arts because they like to go to party or to places that are more dangerous. Maybe some of you are thinking my return on investment wasn't so bad because I protected myself successfully, but just like the folks saying they want to hit the clubs or whatever, my own experiences would have been different with the power of more competent decision making. These weren't events that, strictly speaking, had to happen. The second thing I picked up on from all this is that my martial arts training really didn't come into play, like almost at all. This isn't because my training is bad either. One was just over in an instant, and the other was a case of an overdosing individual, and, well, we could have put him to sleep, but there's a real chance when you put someone like that to sleep that they just don't wake back up. Speaking frankly, even if such a thing were justified in the sense of protecting myself, I've lost people in my life, and although that guy might have deserved it, his family just doesn't. I don't want that kind of crap on my conscience for the rest of my life, and these are the kinds of variables that people don't really talk about when it comes to self-defense. I do think it is possible to train for these kinds of things, but it's very, very difficult. Something I think I've failed with at my content, though, is communicating that I'm not rejecting self-defense as a valid reason for training necessarily. I think it's fine to train for self-defense if that's offering you some kind of comfort. The point I've been making is that we overemphasize how important it is. Generally, you're going to avoid 99% of self-defense situations in first world countries by not being in places where danger happens, by not being with people that danger follows, and by just gradually increasing your socioeconomic status. I know that last thing is easier said than done in these economically dubious times, but it is possible. Keep in mind, I funded my move to Japan with 4 years of entry-level warehouse work and by living in the boonies beneath my means. It's not fun, it was an awful time, but where there is a will, there is a way. I used to be like a lot of folks with the mainstream view of martial arts, though. I was very concerned with self-defense, very concerned with winning every sparring session, and very concerned with the raw functionality of what I was doing. And I still like my martial arts to be functional somewhat. It's just that it's like a third or fourth tier priority these days. I'll get more into that in a second. So it isn't like I don't train for it necessarily, I just don't really consider that angle much, even though I do still enjoy a good playful spar. I think my hard sparring days are a bit behind me now. I've learned important things about how to take a hit and how to continue fighting even when you're hurt and how to hide that you're hurt. But these are lessons that I feel pretty confidently are learned at this point. The other piece of this is age. I've been doing this long enough to see a lot of people quit and a lot of people get old. I know of national level competitors that I used to train with who got concussed so badly that they quit in their prime, and my primary teachers all have knee replacements, hip replacements, collarbones bolted together, and just all kinds of other issues. On top of this, a lot of my personal martial arts inspirations were training well into their 70s and 80s. I'm just now 30, which, for the record, I do not think is old at all. But I do think this is when a lot of people start to become much more aware of their biology slowing down, myself included. I certainly don't recover as quickly now, and decent fitness actually requires effort and maintenance. As a result of this, I want to start tackling issues now, so hopefully when I'm in my 50s and 60s, I don't need all these surgeries and I can still move the way I want. And that isn't just for me, but it's for my family. You know, I want to be able to go do things and have a good time without having to sit down every couple steps. I've had some hip issues in the past, not related to age, but it does still have some impact on me, so I'd like to see if that's like a flexibility issue, if I just have really weak hip flexors, or if it is something that's just now built into my body. It's been a long time goal of mine to make sure that I don't become a prisoner in my own form, though. Trust me, regardless of what a martial art may say about safety and health and longevity, if you aren't taking care of your body seriously and consciously, there will inevitably be wear and tear. It's just a fact of nature. With any sport, there will be a cost, and it's typically physical. Having said all this, where does it leave my training? Well, right now I'm wrapping up a very brief stint at a jiu-jitsu place. This has really just been to polish up my ground game a little, which is definitely my weakest area, martially speaking, but I am letting that membership expire. This has to do somewhat with work and somewhat with my own goals, but the gym itself is actually really good, so it's not on them at all. This is not an indictment of quality. From there, I have a set of priorities. First, I'm most importantly training to be mobile, to be able to move my body how I want and when I want. Yes, this is essentially fitness, but I think we treat fitness too lightly in the martial arts world. I know a lot of people who will show up 2 or 3 times a week and claim that this is their fitness. This is all of it. This is everything they do. But something I've learned from old martial arts manuals, believe it or not, is that fitness used to be a much bigger deal, in some cases maybe even the biggest deal. Sumitomo's 1904 manual, cleverly entitled Judo, has a section basically just devoted to it. Tong Zhongyi's book, The Method of Chinese Wrestling, devotes about 60% of the whole book just to fitness. I can think of several other martial arts, Uechi Ryu comes to mind here, that are clearly designed with the expectation that you do style-specific fitness and conditioning on your own time, too. So for me, I specifically want to train for fitness in a way specifically for my martial arts, with the end result of being able to move my body the way I want, when I want. I need to stress, though, this isn't really going to be the classic go to gym, get big sort of method that is largely the norm in America, and not just because weightlifting gyms in Japan in general are notoriously awful. I'm instead very interested in implementing some of these old school methods and having a serious stretching routine that I actually do on a normal basis, and maybe in fooling around with some other lesser known methods just to see how they interface with my martial arts. To be clear, this doesn't mean that if I do calisthenics, for example, that I'm necessarily aiming to be a calisthenics athlete. If I can get the planche or something like that, that's really cool, but I really am mostly interested in seeing how these things affect my martial arts specifically. Nor am I expecting any of this to revolutionize martial arts fitness or anything goofy like that. I just think these things are underexplored and in modern martial arts even sometimes met with negativity. I've known many guys over the years who will moan and groan about conditioning and just want to get to the techniques in class. I think this is an error, given so much of this fitness stuff has been a very deliberate, very purposeful part of these systems historically. So that's my first goal. My second priority is that I want to keep my martial arts an intellectual challenge. A lot of people hate arts like Aikido because it quote-unquote doesn't work, but as I've said on the channel before, I think this is kind of a feature, not a bug. I thoroughly enjoy the challenge of taking niche techniques and working on them in live sparring. I think the training loop of theorize, test, repeat is extremely rewarding. In a weird way, I almost dislike it when things go too well for me in martial arts because it gets boring. I don't like things that are quote-unquote solved. While a single leg or a big cross might be a far more consistent way of going about your martial training, I don't really like how centralizing it makes things for some folks. I'm really opposed to the whole get good quick, only teach me the most optimal techniques type approach to martial arts that seems to only be getting more and more popular these days. I think countries like America, for example, overemphasize the martial piece, and countries like Japan overemphasize the art piece, but they are both valid so long as they are relatively balanced. To me, I've been doing the martial piece for 25 years or so now, and only in the last 3 to 5 of those have I really started viewing what I do as more of an art form. From where I sit, bringing these niche techniques to bear in sparring sessions is as much a physical challenge as it is a creative and cognitive one, which embodies what martial arts are all about. My last priority is sparring. Yeah, it isn't going anywhere. I still enjoy it, but it's no longer the forefront of my training. Even 5 to 6 years ago, this probably would have been my first goal. The reality is that self-defense and fighting are rare, but I walk, pick things up, hike, and use my mind nearly every day. Well, I'd like to think I use my mind nearly every day, but these are areas that I am going to get the biggest return on investment for. And at the end of the day, like I just said, the art has to be balanced with the martial. I very much advocate for a middle path in training, so it isn't like I'm just going to toss live training into the dustbin or whatever. As for competition, maybe I will. I have a mixed point of view on competition. I think it's a good thing overall, and I don't think it's bad that people enjoy it. But at the same time, competition so frequently degenerates in just trying to game the rule set. And I know some people will say that's part of the game or whatever, but it's just part of the game that I find really, really boring. If you can tolerate those contrivances, or if I can find something that I think I can tolerate, then maybe I will do competition, but it really isn't super high on my list of to-dos. Anyway, how is all of this going to manifest into my practice? Well, I am pleased to say that I found a nearby Taido dojo that I hope to try out very soon. If you don't know what Taido is, it's basically like a marriage of karate and gymnastics. It doesn't proclaim to be about fighting, which I'd agree with, and seems to have a flexibility for evolution built into the system. I think the fact that the art hasn't broken into separate lineages in its 60 or 70-ish years of existence is a testament to that. Plus, of course, body mobility and freedom of movement are front and center here, so I'm very much looking forward to trying that out. More in the long term, I do want to make my way up to the Tamiki Aikido Dojo as well. I say the because despite what folks may think of Tokyo, things like Tamiki Aikido and Taito are actually still fairly niche even here. The major thing keeping me from doing this now are some schedule conflicts and the fact that it's like an hour and 20 minutes one way. Again, I've had commenters suggest I try this or that out, and I do appreciate that input, but I also think a lot of people severely underestimate just how big Tokyo is. Unless you're doing a very mainstream art, it can actually be pretty rough to find places to train that are also within a reasonable travel distance. But I digress. I'd like to do Tamiki Aikido to round out my Aikido history a little bit. I've already got rank in Aikikai and Yoshinkan. While rank is not at all a motivator for me these days, I think training with the last of the quote-unquote big three Aikido styles would really be a good experience. Plus, I'd like to participate in Randori. I've been kind of a lurking admirer for a while now. Outside of this, I'm going to start experimenting with my fitness routine. I posted a few days back if people would like to see training vlogs, and most people said go for it. Filming in dojos and exercise centers is generally prohibited in Japan. In fact, filming in general can be a bit of a gray area if third parties are involved. But what I can probably do is go to the park and film my own training. That's where I've been training recently, be it just some normal fitness stuff or solo training specific to a given martial art. And there will have to be some solo training because Taito, being niche as it is, and my work schedule being what it is, I'll probably only be able to make it so many times a week, unfortunately. In the long term, like a year or so, I'm hoping to move into a field that is a bit more open in terms of scheduling. In like 3 to 5 years, I'd really like to be doing, well, this full time, which means I could do whatever I wanted in terms of training. So I guess this is the cue to like and subscribe if you want to see that in the long term. All right, so that is really where I'm at. Hopefully this has been a fun little peek into how all the research and philosophy stuff on the channel is going to translate into my training going forward, and maybe even your training if you really want it to. Or you can disagree with me and keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate you guys watching. I think we've got some exciting times ahead of us, and I will see you all in the next one very, very soon. Peace.